Text animators. They're really useful inside After Effects when you're creating titles and lower thirds, and I must say it's something you must know if you're gonna go into motion graphics using After Effects. So here I have created a simple composition. I have solid as a background, and I have a text layer written out using text animators. Now, the first time you're probably going to come across text animators would be with the presets that come with After Effects. So if you go to the Effects and Presets panel, you can expand the animation preset segment where you have a whole bunch of stuff you can use. But most importantly, we want to go into text. And in there, we want to go to, well, we have a whole bunch of options, but I'm going to go with Animate In, and you'll find even more presets that you can use. So I'm going to grab a random one, say Random Shuffle In, and I'll drop it on my text. And now if I move the time, you'll see my text is animating in, and that's pretty awesome. That's pretty nice, and you're good to go. But as far as it goes, it's not very good to rely on presets, because when you know how the preset works, you can go out and create all sorts of fancy things on your own. So I'm going to undo and just close up all of this. And now we're going to create something from scratch. So if we go to expand the text layer, you'll find down here the animate button. See here we get enable per character 3D, which is going to come in later. We have all transform settings, position, scale, rotation, opacity. We have fill color of the text, stroke color if you have a stroke applied, and a bunch of other options that are pretty useful, especially blur. So, okay, let's get started by adding a position. Alright, so the first thing you'll notice in the viewer is that you get a bunch of X's here. And these mark the anchor points for each individual letter, including spaces. These are used when you apply rotation and scale, and they're going to scale about that point or rotate and pivot about that point. So that's pretty important. For now, we have position applied, and that's basically just telling us that 0 is here, and whatever we apply it's going to move with it. Next, we also have two markers that are added on either side of the layer, and that is the start point and the end point, which we'll get to in a second. And finally, down in the text layer itself, we have Animator 1 that's been created. It's also come with an add button, and we have Range Selector 1 and the position property that we've added. So the first thing we're going to do is move the position higher, and this is going to move the layer down. And I'm going to put this to 680. Alright, so the text has moved out of the screen, but before we move forward, it's important to note that our anchor point is still here, which means the transform properties of the text layer itself as a whole is not changing. The position is still 960 by 540, which is the center of the composition. But we've also done position over here, adding 680 to it. So it's now moving the layers down by 680 pixels. Okay, that's pretty interesting. The main thing about this to note is that you can actually combine this position property and the position property of the layer to do all sorts of fancy things when it comes down to it. But for now, we're going to open up the range selector and see what options it has. So first we have start, end, and offset. Start is the marker that we saw at the beginning on the left side. When we increase this, you'll see this indicator moves to the right and basically just animates each letter back in one by one. Secondly, we also have end, which is the opposite. It's on the other side at the end of the text, and when you move that, it brings in the letters one by one, but from the other side. Finally, we have offset, which you use to move both of them at the same time. So right now I've put offset to 100. So it's going to add that 100 to start, which is going to move it all the way to the other end. And when we do the negative, it's going to apply minus 100 to the end, which is going to bring it back to this other side. So as you can see here, they're both together because, well, this stays at 0 and this becomes 0 because of that minus 100. Cool. Okay, let's go back to 0 and let's see what else we can do with the range selector when we go into the advanced segment. Well, you're technically ready to go once you use the start and the end controls. No, but there's more to it than just simple letter by letter animation. So if you go into advanced, you'll find a whole bunch of options that are pretty interesting. Probably check out on your own. But most importantly, what we want to look at now is based on. So right now it's set to characters, and as you could tell before, they were all animating in letter by letter, and we can change this to words, and that's going to do each word one by one. And finally, we'll go to lines, and this will do each line. So using text alone, and then animators comes in. So depending on your usage, most times I use lines when I'm working with a lot of text that needs to come in pretty fast. Words is pretty nice. It's nice and clean. It's not too busy. And characters is just nice and fun when you use it nicely. So that's how based on works. Next, we have mode and amount, which we can skip for now. Those are not things you'll play with very often unless you're going really, really advanced and stacking a lot of animators on top of one another. But for now, what would be more important is to look at shape. So currently the shape is set to square and the smoothness is set to 100. So what we have here with the range selector is actually we're drawing a graph of how much of this position is actually affecting the layer. So for now we have square and we have a smoothness of 100. So as you saw before, when we bring stuff in, they're sort of coming in one letter at a time. And that's happening because of something interesting that happens in the back end of After Effects. And I think it's pretty important to know exactly what's going on. So over here I have paint. I have prepared just some text here, nothing particularly fancy. But I'm going to grab the brush here and just add in a few details to this sort of text placeholder I have here. First, I'm going to show you the start marker that we had and the end marker that we had right there. Probably draw those shapes, but that's just going to take forever. I don't trust myself. So let's assume that this is the range selector and you're telling it exactly what you want to affect. Currently, we have a shape of square. So let's draw a little graph down here. Let's say this is 0 and this is 100%. You know, I can have a graph like this. That looks cool. I could do one on this side as well for the end. And this is 0. So the range selector is basically where this graph sits. And when you have square, it would look like this, where you have 100% all the way and 0 outside. But since we have a smoothness set of 100, it kind of rounds out a bit. And but stays flat at the top and then comes down like this. So what happens when you bring in this start to the right side, you're actually moving this whole graph. You're kind of moving this start to go like this, and it's just squeezing up together until finally start and end meet, and then there's basically nothing in between. And the same goes for end. You're just moving this way. So what's happening as this M kind of meets this sort of dip here, it animates back into position. So that's what we see when we do with the end. You can see the S just comes in as the graph, as it meets that curve of the graph. Okay, so what? I mean, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. But what's more important about this is how it's treating everything outside. Ooh, I was meant to draw there. So this should be how it's treating everything that's on the outside of this graph. So with square, as you can see, this is 0. So it means this end goes to 0, this other end goes to 0, and everything in between stays at 100. All right. Interesting. Well, let's go back to After Effects and let's change this Let's change this shape to ramp up. And now what happens is our shape is, well, ramping. As you can see, the U is where it would be if it was not affected by the animator. And the S, which is at the end of animators, is currently experiencing 100% of the effect of this positioning of 680. It's actually at 680, and all these are in between. Okay, so what's happening now is, oh god, I really don't like paint, guys. I don't even know why I'm using it. I guess it's fun drawing in here. It's a lot easier drawing in here, I guess. So with ramp up, what we get is a diagram like this, ramping upwards. So as you remember, the U was experiencing 0, which is here, and the M was experiencing, the M is experiencing 100%, or rather the S, which in this case, I should have probably written this text out completely, but the last letter is going to take 100. So that means that everyone on this side is experiencing 100, and everyone on this side is experiencing 0. So if we go back and we use the start, remember, using the start and end is gonna squeeze the graph together. Okay, so let me use start. If I pull this in, you'll see they're all coming back up, but until we get pretty close about there, the S is not moving at all. So it's just squeezing that ramp in until, bam, we're back to 0. Everyone's back to 0. As you recall, this way is 0. The start is here, so everyone's experiencing 0. So this is not necessarily the best way to go about animating when you have ramp up or ramp down selected. Square is a lot more forgiving, but with ramp up and ramp down, which is affecting the whole area rather than just at the edges, it's making it, well, look a bit weird. We have all the letters ramping nicely, but when we animate this way, this last S especially is a good example. As you can see, it's coming in on its own, but everyone else is sort of moving in together, which is not necessarily the worst. There's definitely a use for that, but it's not the best. So how would you do it? Using offset. Now offset will work by simply just like grabbing this whole thing and just moving it like this, because the start and end kind of remain the same space, so this is what moves. So if you go to offset, you can check it out. Now it's a lot smoother. If you set to -100, it means our whole graph is on this other side, so they're all affected by the range selector, and then as we increase this, they just slide in nicely, uniformly actually. So this can also be manipulated. If you set this end a bit lower, let's say to 25%, and we crank this up, you'll see that now there's a bit of a hesitation at the beginning, but as we start getting to 25%, which is what we've subtracted there, you see now the gap between the letters is a lot smaller, but it's much more uniform now. And actually in this case, you can see now how it's ramping. It actually looks pretty cool. So with ramp up, we have this way. Ramp down is this way. So ramp down, the 0 is on this side, the 100 is on this side. And with triangle, it's like this. It's a lot like square, but now you have a slope in between. You also have round and you have smooth, which is kind of like square, but it's a bit more squeezed together. So square, ramp up, ramp down, triangle, which you can see here, triangle. The S is where it would be. The U is where it would be. Oops, this should be 0 actually, sorry. If this is at the default, you'll see the S is where it's supposed to be, the U is where it's supposed to be, but now the effect increases this way and then decreases that way on the last few letters. So, okay, that's pretty cool. Let's stick this to ramp up. Let's set the offset to -100, set a keyframe, go up to say 2 seconds and increase this value so they can animate in, and then we can hit N, trim comp to work area so it's not so long, and there you have your nice animation. All right, let's check out the other controls down here, which are pretty cool. As you can see, the text is sort of moving in a uniform speed and then stopping when they get to where they need to go, which doesn't necessarily look the best. Sometimes you want to ease this. Now, when you ease this, what's going to happen is that it's going to, the last few letters are just going to come in a little bit slower than the rest. And that's not necessarily what you would be looking for. What you would be looking for is ease high and ease low. Now, remember, when they are completely being affected by the range selector, they are high, they're experiencing 100%, and when they're back to normal, it's low, 0. So if you want to ease this end when they're already showing, use ease low. So let's set this to 100. And you'll see that now they come in and sort of slow down as they get to the position they need to. Ease is dependent on the actual characters. It's not the whole text layer on its own. So you actually don't need to ease these keyframes for the range selector. We can set this to words, which also produces some really cool sliding in text when you're using ease. This can also go to negative, which sort of does the opposite. It's not as clean. It sort of just starts slow and then everything just snaps into place. It's a lot easier to just simply do 100% on the ease high. Pretty much the same thing, but I tend to find it a bit more forgiving. Now, if you have both of them on 100, you're going to get some pretty funky results. And I think all this is really dependent on the style and the theme you're going for here. All right, cool. Let's set ease high back to 0. It's really nice to have text look like it's already at speed when it's coming in and it's just slowing down. When you have ease high really up there, you can actually just see the text starts to speed up at the bottom, which is not necessarily the best. Okay, cool. That's about the shape. So let's manipulate this and try and add sort of bounce to how this text is going to appear in our first example. So I'll go to the animator one as we created before. It has its position property added in. It has my text sliding in. For one, I'm going to have to remove the ease because it's going to mess around with my bounce effect. The bounce is the one that's going to get the ease. So let's go and add another animator that's going to add just a small slide downwards for each of the text. So let's deselect animator 1. Let's go animate, position. And this time we have a position of 680. So we'll need to do a negative value. So here in position we'll do minus, it was minus 680. So let's do minus 120, maybe 150. That should be okay. And then we're gonna copy the styling. So we'll go to advanced, we'll go to based on, we'll choose words, go to shape, ramp up. We'll just set the keyframes here. So this should be minus 100 and over here should be 100. So now it's back to normal where it was supposed to be. And then we'll set this one to have the ease low of, actually let's not ease just yet. Let's see that it's working properly first. So I'll select this, hit U, and I'll just grab these keyframes and just offset them slightly. So what happens is we have the text comes in and it's a really tiny look, but you can see it kind of comes down. We can just increase this gap a bit. And now we have a nice little bounce. Of course, your bounce should be proportional to how fast your stuff is moving. So probably want to mess around with these a bit. It looks even better when you have characters. So you can set this to say, you can search based on with the layer selected. It's going to show those two based on settings. And we can change this to characters. And now each of the characters is going to come in and have that nice little bounce. Nice. Not bad. But what we can do as well is go to animator 1. We can go to add, property, and choose opacity. And that way they fade in rather than just appearing from the bottom. So there we go. So let me expand animator 1 and you'll see that down here we have now position alongside opacity down here. All right, that looks pretty nice. Let's go back to checking out the settings. I'm going to remove animator 2 and we'll go back to our simple animation of our text sliding in. And let's see what other options we have. We have randomize order, which is going to make them each come in, well, randomly rather than in order, which is pretty useful in its own right. And I'm going to switch that off as well. So let's go to animator 1. We'll go to add, and we also have a selector option. So we actually have the capability of adding another range selector, which is just going to be so confusing, oh my god. And I'm just going to ignore it entirely and go down to Wiggly. Wiggly is a wiggle, as you would know. So let me add in the Wiggly and go to the range selector, and I'm just going to switch off the offset and set it back to 0, which is the standard. So what we have with Wiggly is that it's basically like taking these two position and opacity properties and adding a wiggle expression to them. So they're going to fade randomly, they're going to move randomly based on the values you've applied here. If I increase this, you'll see they now do it in X as well. That S is going a bit crazy, whereas the U is sort of chilled out. Remember, this is all because we're using ramp up, so the effect is becoming stronger from the U going all the way to the S. So I should probably set this to square so that everyone's sort of getting the same amount applied to them. So the Wiggly Selector has the same sort of the same options as the range selector with a few differences. Max amount is how much of this it's going to use. So say let me put this X to 0. You can see this sort of moving up and down. But if you set the minimum amount to 0, they'll only move downwards, they won't move upwards. Same goes for max amount. We can also go to based on and change this to words or lines. The same thing still applies. And that looks pretty nice. And we also have wiggles per second. Correlation is how much they wiggle close to each other. It's good to see with characters, if as you drop this down, they sort of all go on their own routes. If this is set to 0, they just all go crazy. About 50, 75%, 80% is really nice because they just move together. Easier to keep track of what's going on for the viewer. Temporal phase would be most visible if you have more than one, and you just want one to be slightly behind the other. Spatial phase as well. Lock dimensions means whatever it does to X, it's going to do the same amount to Y, and you have your random seed. So Wiggly Selector is pretty nice. Remember, it also affects the position. It only takes into account what you have down here. So if you had scale here, they'd scale randomly. So I guess we could switch over to that. Wow, that actually looked pretty decent with opacity. They're just sort of flashing. That's really nice to just leave playing in the background in its own animator. Okay, I digress. So let's see what other selector we have. Wiggly is pretty fun. If you need to switch it on and off, it's also controlled by the range selector. So if I move this start up, you'll see it reduces its effect completely, or it can also happen the other way around. So you just basically use the range selector just as you did before. The Wiggly just adds that little extra dimension of interestingness to the text. Finally, we have add selector expression. Now, this is gonna be pretty tricky. If you do use expressions, this is pretty weird. It's not really what you'd expect it to do what it does. So the way we have this Wiggly sort of playing around with the amount, this basically affects the range selector itself, not necessarily the opacity or the position or whatever you have going on. This one is pretty interesting. So I'll go to property and add position. Crank this up, and you'll see we can remove the Wiggly and just have this sort of doing that. Expression range, let's go advanced. We're still at square, and this is now the expression controller that's making it look like ramp, because it's taking selector value, which is this, and it's basically doing what ramp up, ramp down does. It lets you create your own graph for how the letters are going to be affected by the properties that are down here. Now that might sound a bit complicated, but I think one of my favorite ways of using the expression selector, and probably the only way I will ever use this, is to alternate letters. So what you can do is go, if you're into expressions, this is pretty awesome. If you're not, you're gonna hate this part. But we're gonna type if text index %2 is greater than 0. Selector value, else minus selector value. Okay, that should work. If that works, I'm gonna be so jazzed. It worked! Amazing. Okay, so what's happening here is it's going to check the index of the text. Now the text index works just like index in any other control that you've in like layers. Layer index would be this text is index 1, deep cyan solid 1 is index 2. So it's gonna count each letter, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And it's going to check. Now this is modulo, which basically it's going to take this value and divide it by 2. And it's going to check if the remainder is greater than 0. I think I should just draw this. Let's go file new. So how modulo works is if you were to do, say, 5 divided by 3, and you do 1, 3, that leaves you the 2, you can't really do anything. So modulo's answer is going to be 2. So that means that basically whatever you divide, if it leaves a remainder, it's going to tell you what that remainder is. So in this case, we're telling it to divide everything by 2. And the only time it's ever going to leave a remainder when divided by 2 is if you're using an odd number. So one, something like, let's see here. It's completely going to disregard this number, by the way, at the top. So say you do 10 and you have a 2 here. This is 5, so you get 10 and this is 0. So the result is going to be 0. But if you do 11 divided by 2, you're going to get 5, 10, and you'll be left with a 1. So this 1 is what we're looking for. And we're going to say greater than 0. This means that for all even numbers, basically, for all even numbers, which means the ones that will give a result of 0, use selector value. And for all numbers that do not divide, because they're going to give a number of greater than 0, use minus selector value. And what's going to happen with that is that you get each of these letters alternating, giving opposite results. So you'll see here that if I set this to ramp up so it's a bit smoother, you can see they all sort of scissor in and close in like this, which looks pretty damn cool. I think it looks cool. I don't know about you guys, but it looks pretty awesome, especially how that animators comes in. Really nice. Maybe if you do with words, you can see with the words, the individual letters are also splitting up. That's because down here, we have to do words as well. So let's see here. You see using comes from down, text comes from up, animators comes from down. This doesn't work so well with opacity because opacity can't go negative. When you set to negative selector value, it can't go minus 0. So you might see that one of them is not fading. Text is not fading because opacity can't go minus, but the rest can. So pretty cool, isn't it? I think it really is. I think it's useful in some cases, not always though. So that's the expression selector, only for advanced users. I think if you really understand how expressions work, this is pretty useful. So you get text index, selector value, and also text total, which is the total number of text in there. So if you can think of a cool way to make a graph, that would be pretty awesome. Now we know how all the selectors work: expression, range, and wiggly. Let's take a look at a quick example of how you can use text animators. Simple enough to create something like a title card. We can go to, say, using text animators. Let's say that's the title of this movie. We can go animate. Let's remove animator 1 and start from scratch. We can go animate, enable per character, position. We'll go animate, enable per character 3D. That's going to make this layer a 3D layer. It's going to have these two little boxes, meaning that it's an animator that's making it 3D and not the standard 3D that you're used to. And now we can actually move this in Z. So I'll move this forward all the way. I'll go add property and we'll choose rotation. And we'll rotate it in Y by, let's say, 2 rotations. And then we'll animate this. So let's go down to the range selector. Let's go advanced. Let's grab shape to ramp up, offset to -100, so that all of them are affected by the range selector, and then this to +100, so that none of them are affected by the range selector, and now we get this. Cool. They're sort of still slapping onto the screen, so let's go to ease low and do 100, and that should just slow them down as they get into position. We can switch on motion blur on the layer and on the composition, and that will allow it to come in pretty nicely. Alright, that looks pretty nice, but not quite interesting enough. We can add a randomize order, and that's just going to make them come in randomly so that you don't really know what's going on until all the letters are there. That looks cool. That actually looks pretty cool. Yeah, and you can sort of mess around with these. We can go words, and that's going to bring in one word at a time. But notice that they each spin individually. They're still spinning by character, even though we did based on words. So if you go up to the more options, you can expand that area, we'll get anchor point grouping. Remember those little X's we saw when we were tweaking this control? When we added the animator, that's what that's about. So we can select, say, position here. You see the X's here on each letter. But if you come on over to the anchor point grouping, we can change this to word. And that's going to put the anchor point right in the middle of each word for those letters. So now we get them all spinning in together like this. We can still set the range selector down here to use characters, and now the characters are going to spin on the axis of the word. So as you can see with the T there, that T is sort of spinning all around all the other text, especially the R. That's because the anchor point is set to the word. And with this line where we have two words, if you set this to line, it's gonna look way funky, bro. Like crazy funky. It's really cool. And pretty easy to pull off. Alternatively, we also have grouping alignment. So if I set this to character again, this time let's use the X rotation. So I'll set this to 2. And you'll see they sort of flip at the bottom like this. And we can go up and choose, let's say words first. That doesn't really do a difference because the anchor point is still at the bottom. But if we go to grouping alignment, we can move the anchor point up so that it's in the middle right there. So as the text animates, it sort of doesn't flip downwards or upwards. You could do the opposite, maybe put them at the top, and now it spins like that. You know, once again, entirely up to you, depending on the use case and what you intend to do with it. But I think it's really awesome. All right. Well, that's it for most of the settings that you can play with. Let's take our final example and look at how we can make something that isn't necessarily text. And I really like this part because this is where I just get to do some funky things. So I'll add a new text layer. I won't type anything else inside just yet. I'll just click away, grab the cursor here. I can show the title action safe so I can see the center, and I'll grab the ellipse tool. And with the text layer selected, I'm going to find the center there, which is 960 by 540 in the info panel. So let's see here, 960 by, there we go. We can hold Control Shift just to draw a nice circle right in the middle, and we can let go. And then we could go to text, go to path options, and we'll choose path as mask 1, which is the circle we just drew. And we can just put a bunch of what do I want, underscores. So let's just do this, and you'll see this just sort of fill in the circle there, which looks cool as well. Now we have these two here that are kind of joined, which is hell for my OCD. So let's come here to the force alignment. We're gonna switch that on, and now rather than appearing at the bottom like they were before, they'll sort of just spread out like this. So I can already kind of see a whole bunch of stuff I could do with something like this. That should do. And let's go to first margin, and we'll just spread these out a bit better. Was it last margin that I want to tweak? Yeah, last margin is a bit better, but this is kind of not in the center, so it's already annoying. But that about there should be okay. We can hide the masks, maybe just rotate this so that I can stop worrying about it so much. There we go. And okay, so now we're just gonna use the animators as we had before. And I'm sorry guys, I'm just gonna fill this in completely. It looks way cooler when you have a lot of them. Let's go to more options, path options, and let's bring this in until it's about the same spacing as all the others. That looks okay to me. And then now we can add our text animators. So let's go animate. I'm gonna add blur, and we can unlink this to blur them in sort of different directions here. X looks pretty trippy, and Y is also pretty nice. So I'll do a lot in the Y and just a little bit in the X, just to so it's not completely blurred out. And then we'll go add property position, and we can move these guys into the center by moving the Y. And then we can add property opacity and set opacity to 0. So now they're completely gone. But if we go to range selector 1 and remove the start, you'll see in they come. So here's one of the problems with Square. With each of them coming in one by one, you have about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, about 4 frames of each, thereabouts. They're moving in a bit too fast. You're gonna have to make this animation pretty slow if you wanna see them individually. So what we'll do is set this back to 0. go to advanced, and under shape, I'll set this to ramp up. And now they come in sort of this spirally goodness, which looks pretty dope. And I liked how they blurred out. It looks like they're sort of coming in from depth of field, which is pretty nice. We could also try out randomize order on, and that's just gonna bring them in randomly like this. Pretty nice. So let's animate that. So I'll zoom in here. So offset is -100. Let's go to 2 seconds. Increase this. Now they're all visible. Cool. And let's add some emphasis of some kind. So I'll click away, go to animate, and choose fill color, RGB, and that's going to change the color of the text, and it's going to add it as animator 2. So just like we had done earlier with the bounce, animator 2 is going to add on top of what's going on. So currently fill color is not being done by animator 1, so it's not going to be affected. But if we added more blur or more position or more opacity, as long as animator 2 is applying, it's going to affect animator 1, even when animator 1 is at 0. So you usually want to have something like opacity and blur in animator 1 if it's going to be your in animation. But for now, we only need to work with fill color. So I'm going to change this to, let's say, this lightish blue color. I can also add property and choose scale, and we can just scale this up a bit. So you'll see that my text is sort of moving out of position when I scale, and that's because of the anchor point. So let's switch this on. Let's just grab the animator 2, and let's try and find that, grab scale. There's our anchor point. As you can see, it's right there. Not so good. So let's go more options and move this so that it's just touching the text. There we go. And now when we scale, they sort of just scale and maintain their position. So we could do this way and outward so that it kind of fills that circle. And we can do red. We can go back to red as the color. And range selector, let's go to advanced, and let's go to randomize order on. We can just change up the random seed so that it doesn't look like the previous one, as unlikely as that can be. And then we'll do offset. So let's go actually here and do shape. Let's change this to triangle. And when we do the offset, we'll get something pretty funky like this. Whoa. That's pretty cool. So we're at 2 seconds. Let's click here. Let's push this to 3. Let's go +100. We can hit U here, and we can actually even make this thing span the entire time. Okay, this comp is way too long. Let's do 6 seconds here. And let's span this the whole way. So now even as it's coming in, it's sort of still doing that red thing there. You could put this in the center and send this all the way back to -100, so it kind of happens twice, like that. And then we'll say, okay, this is our sort of targeting reticle, and it's looking for a target. So let's do that. It's actually found its target, and we'll go here to 4 seconds. I'm just basically going to duplicate this. Remember, it's set to triangle, and triangle on either side was set to come on and off. So when offset goes from -100 to 100, it's going to go on and off. And so we'll just duplicate animator 2. We'll go down to the range selector, advanced, and we'll go to ramp up. And it can keep the red color, it can keep the scaling. And this time we'll set the offset off. Just do it again. So this is currently when it's fully on, so we'll put it fully off. And go over here and just put a keyframe there, and then set this to -100 so it's fully on. I can add a position, and this can help me make the circle a little smaller. Maybe scale these like this so it looks more like a sort of targeting reticle of sorts. Let's say like that. And now what's going to happen is it comes in, it has its little subtle animation, and then they sort of go down into that position. So let's give this a watch. Whoops, I think That's pretty slow. Let me bring this in. So as you can see, the animator 2 and animator 3 are sort of adding on top of each other. That's why you can see this is scaling so crazily. It's still animator 2 doing this. So remember, transform has been left untouched. So we can literally just say scale this down. Like that size, put it over here. We can wiggle its position just to kind of make it look like it's chasing a target. So let's do 900. So it kind of moves around. Target sighted, Captain. You know, I don't know. Something like that. 900 is a bit too much. Let's do 450. It's found its target. And target locked. Cool. Let's add a bunch of these. Duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. And there we go. Iron Man helmet, baby. No? Anyone? I think it could. I think it could pass. You know, he's locked onto his targets. Bam! And he fires his rockets. As you can see, they also tend to have sort of a similarity to how they animate. If you look here, say this frame, you can see they all look exactly the same. So you can select them all, go to search and type random seed and just tweak them. So give this something else, give this something else, and give this something else. And now they kind of, you know, oops. Yes, there you go. As you can see, that's sort of shaking as it changes. Oh, this is just for one layer, so we can go to the others and just make sure they each have different values of random seed, just to be sure that they all don't look the same. But you know, this is so there we go. Alright guys, thanks for checking out this tutorial. I'm David Alex from Ideas to Creations. Let me know what you make with your animators. Just drop a link in the comments below. And if you have any questions, feel free to holler here on the Facebook page or on Twitter. I'm mostly online. And well, thanks for watching. Your feedback is appreciated, but that's it for now. And I will see you guys in the next tutorial.